To explain why I still work there despite the strange things that happen, it's simply because the job pays more than minimum wage and it's only about a 10-minute drive from my house. So, before anyone asks why I don't quit, that's the reason. I work at a large hotel in a medium-sized city in the American Midwest, but the specific location isn't important. I started working right after graduating high school, and it was a perfect job. Good pay, close to home, and very easy. Before I started, I looked into the hotel's history. It wasn't built on any ancient burial ground, and as far as I knew, no one had ever died there. Things only started to get strange when the third-floor renovation began. My position at the hotel is a jack-of-all-trades type, meaning I handle many different tasks. Cleaning rooms, working at the front desk, delivering room service, and sometimes even acting as a lifeguard at the pool. When the strange phenomena occurred, they happened everywhere, and because of my job, I witnessed more than any other employee. Believe it or not, the events I'm about to tell you are completely true for me. I wish they were just my imagination. I started my evening shift at 8:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. Since it was midweek, the occupancy was only about half of its usual capacity. The hotel wasn't empty, but the pace wasn't as busy as a Friday or Saturday night. The first few hours of the shift went by like any other day. I checked the expected arrivals for the evening-only 2 new reservations. The kitchen closed at 10:00 p.m., so I only had to deliver 1 room service order. I even got a $5 tip, a bright spot in the shift. Just as I was about to sit down at the front desk to relax, the phone rang. I looked at the caller ID, room 323. Immediately, I felt suspicious. The third-floor renovation had started 2 weeks ago. I picked up the phone. Hotel X front desk, this is Nick. How may I help you? On the other end, there was a cough. I repeated my question. Oh, excuse me, are you all right? A young female voice replied, I'm fine, but you're not. She sounded worried. I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can do? I asked. I'm not sure. The usual communication script made me forget where the call was coming from. Finally, I inquired, may I ask which room you're calling from? I'm in room 323, and yes, I need help. I hadn't said she needed help, but I went with it. Ma'am, room 323 is currently unoccupied because the third floor is under renovation. Are you sure you're there? What's your name? I need help, Nick, right now. I don't think I should be here, she said, her voice filled with a fear I could feel through the phone. At this point, I realized she might have wandered onto the third floor and into room 323 to make the call. All right, what's wrong and what's your name? I can't get out, the door won't open. It has to open. Confused and a little annoyed that she still hadn't answered my question, I asked directly, what is your name, ma'am? She hesitated. Marion Kennedy, she stammered. Please hold for a moment, I replied, simultaneously checking the guest list. There was no Marion Kennedy in the system. Ms. Kennedy, I don't see your name on the list. Are you with anyone else? Perhaps the room is booked under a different name? And which room did you originally say you were in? I need help. Please come to room 323 and help me, please. Her voice suddenly grew calmer than before, as if she was irritated at having to continue the conversation with me. Ms. Ken, I hadn't even finished my sentence when the phone hung up. What the hell? I muttered. I put a be back in 5 minutes, sign on the front desk, and headed up to the third floor. As I entered the hallway where room 323 was located, a sense of panic immediately washed over me. A chill ran down my spine, making my hair stand on end. I hesitated, moving forward cautiously, observing the scattered renovation equipment and materials. A large plastic sheet covered most of the wall and the doors on the left. I heard faint music coming from the end of the hallway. Room 323 was in the middle. I slowly approached it. The weak light from 2 bulbs at each end of the hallway wasn't enough to dispel the darkness in the center. The music grew louder and louder. It was a tune from the 1920s, like it was playing from an antique gramophone. As I got closer, I noticed a faint red light emanating from under a door. You guessed it, it was room 323. I stood before the door, my whole body trembling with unease. I listened carefully, trying to distinguish any other sounds besides the music. Ms. Kennedy, I whispered, my voice choked in my dry throat. No reply. Just as I was about to turn and leave, a cheerful male voice boomed from inside. "Come in." The gentle, calm voice somewhat reassured me. My anxiety eased slightly. Ms. Kennedy called down to the front desk saying she needed help. "What's wrong? Is she in the bathroom? Why don't you come in and we can sort this out?" the man replied. I hesitated. "Come on in, kid. We don't bite," he said, chuckling softly. He continued to laugh as I used my master key to unlock the electronic door. I slowly turned the doorknob, my heart pounding with fear. As the door creaked open, the gentle laughter suddenly morphed into a maniacal, quangluan laughter, and the red light from inside the room spilled out, engulfing the surrounding darkness. Suddenly, both the laughter and the music cut off simultaneously, as if they were a single sound abruptly severed. I'll never forget that moment of silence. It enveloped me in a terrifying dread. I stood motionless, not daring to move, until I heard a faint whisper, not from one but from two voices. "Just a little more. That's all it takes." I turned and ran like hell down the hallway, dashed down the stairs, and returned to the front desk. I called the police immediately. When they arrived, they went up to check room 323 but found nothing except renovation equipment and materials. No music player, no people, and nothing that could have emitted the red light I saw. Furthermore, there was no sign that anyone had been in there for a long time, evidenced by a thick layer of dust everywhere. If that wasn't strange enough, there was no phone in that room. The police told me to call back if anything else happened. I apologized for wasting their time, but they were very understanding, saying their job was to protect me and reiterated that I shouldn't hesitate to call if I noticed anything unusual. I saw them out the hotel's main entrance and then returned to the front desk. On the counter was an envelope for returning room keys, marked 323. On the back of the envelope was a short survey. All items were marked 1 for terrible, and a short note was left at the bottom, "Maybe next time." I never encountered anything that scary again, but there are still many other horrifying stories about that hotel I want to tell. Perhaps I'll even share why I eventually decided to quit. Without making you wait any longer, let's continue with another story about my ghostly job at the hotel I'll call Whitmore Hotel. This story is probably the most bewildered and anxious I've ever felt among all the things that happened. It took place a few months after the first story I told, with a few minor incidents occurring in between. It was a Saturday night, and I remember it very clearly because the events of that evening were tied to the heavy flow of guests we usually saw on weekends. A colleague and I were working at the front desk, handling reservations in the main lobby. Several groups of guests were chatting, some just returning from bars, others preparing for their next outing. It was around 1:00 a.m. People were taking advantage of the last hour to ruin their livers before heading back to the hotel. I didn't blame them for drinking elsewhere. The drinks at the hotel bar were overpriced. However, the bar was still at about 75% capacity. After finishing with one guest, I realized there was no one else waiting at the front desk. My colleague was serving another guest. I went into the room behind the front desk to grab a drink and check my phone, away from the curious eyes of the remaining guests in the lobby. The hotel played music through speakers located in the hallways and lobby, streamed from a playlist on a dedicated computer. So, when static crackled through the speakers, I was a bit surprised. I paused, listening to the hissing sound of white noise through the speakers, then the music completely stopped. I checked the computer. Everything was still running normally, showing the song that should have been playing. Next, I checked the cables connected to the receiver. No issues there either. I figured this problem was beyond my capabilities, so I turned to head back to the front desk. But as soon as I opened the door, a suffocating silence hit me, startling me. I pushed the door wide open and froze in place. In less than 20 seconds I had been in the room, the entire lobby, with over 20 people including my colleague, had vanished. A cold sweat ran down my back. I looked towards the bar and saw it was also completely empty. In that moment, the only sound I could hear was my own heartbeat. I tried to find a logical explanation for the situation. I stepped into the lobby, each footstep echoing in the vast space. I knocked on a few random doors, but no one answered. Just to be sure, I even checked the second floor. As I was at the end of the second floor hallway, I heard a door creak. I assumed it had just been opened because I didn't hear it close. I walked to the end of the hallway and saw room 202's door ajar. I knocked politely. No reply. I knocked harder, then called out loudly, "Is anyone in there?" Getting no response, I used my master key to open the door and stepped inside. In hindsight, that was probably not a good idea, as I had no idea what awaited me on the other side. Inside, there was nothing. The silence still enveloped me. I checked the main room and the bathroom. No one had left the room. I tried to piece together these illogical fragments. Just then, the eerie silence was broken by the familiar ding of the elevator. I looked up and to the right, seeing the floor indicator panel showing the elevator descending from an upper floor. Realizing the elevator had just passed the second floor, I rushed down the stairs, hoping to find someone to ask what was happening. I stood a safe distance from the elevator, nervously tapping my foot as I waited for the doors to slowly open. No one was inside. I was truly terrified and ran straight into the room behind the front desk. I quickly gathered my belongings, ready to leave the hotel. The confusing and suffocating silence made me desperate, not wanting to be trapped in this place for another minute. But as I turned the doorknob to leave, a sudden wave of noise crashed over me. The music, the chatter of guests in the lobby, my colleague's voice announcing breakfast hours, everything had returned to normal, as if everything that had just happened had never existed. I stood there, frozen, until my colleague turned and asked, "Are you okay?" I was speechless. "Are you going home?" he asked, looking at the jacket I was holding, his voice starting to sound annoyed. I snapped out of it. No, I didn't know what to say and went back into the room. I put my jacket down, took a deep breath, and walked out to the front desk. A new guest was already in line. I straightened my shirt and logged onto the computer. "Welcome, I'm Nick. How can I help you?" By this point in my time at the Whitmore Hotel, I had become extremely cautious. Although nothing truly dangerous had happened to me directly, I still couldn't ignore the strange things around me. I inherently believed in the spiritual world, so these unusual occurrences didn't deeply alarm me, but rather brought on a few haunting, isolated fears. I had avoided the third floor of the hotel as much as possible since the previous event I wrote about, along with some other minor incidents that occurred. If anyone wants to hear about those smaller incidents before the third floor renovation was completed, please leave a comment. I can quickly write about them tomorrow. When I had tasks on the third floor, I usually pawned them off on colleagues without explanation. No one else had ever experienced anything strange there, so they didn't question it much, just thought I was lazy. But then it happened again during a night shift when I was working alone, and of course, this call came from the third floor again. It was a Wednesday night, around 2:00 a.m. I was relaxing behind the front desk when I received a call from room 325. As soon as I answered, I checked the system to make sure the room was occupied tonight. Everything matched the reservation details. The man requested extra towels and told me to leave them outside the door. I turned on my voicemail to announce that I would be back in 10 minutes, put a similar sign on the desk, and went to retrieve towels from storage. I went up to the third floor, knowing exactly where room 325 was because it was near the room that had haunted my nightmares before. I slowly walked down the hallway, and even though the lighting was now more adequate, a sense of unease still clung to me. Nevertheless, I placed the stack of towels on the floor outside the door, knocked twice, and turned to walk away. For some reason, I turned my head back. The stack of towels had vanished. There was no sound of a door opening or closing. I reassured myself that I probably hadn't heard anything because I was deep in thought, and I continued back to the front desk. Less than 5 minutes after I returned to my desk, the phone rang again. This time it was from room 323. Terrifying. I let it ring because I knew for sure no one was in that room tonight. The phone didn't go to voicemail. It kept ringing, perhaps for 30 rings, until a chaotic mix of anxiety and curiosity made me pick up. I didn't say anything. "Hello," a voice rang out from the other end. The voice sounded normal, not the supernatural sound I had imagined. That made me think there might be a logical explanation. "Hello, this is Nick at the front desk. How may I help?" I was cut off before I could finish my sentence. "I asked for more towels." "Yes, sir. I just left towels outside room 325 a few minutes ago," I replied. When I said I needed more towels, I didn't mean a couple of towels from the nearest rack. The raspy voice growled. "I mean I need a stack of damn towels." "All right, sir. I was cut off again, and this time leave them right outside the door. Then the line went dead abruptly. This call left me more confused than scared. So many questions popped into my head. Did the previous call really come from room 323 and I just accidentally missed it? Who took the towels from room 325? The man implied he had taken the towels from outside 325, but I knew for sure that in the time it took me to place the towels and turn back, he couldn't have gotten them from room 323 and returned without me hearing footsteps or a door open and close. I checked the computer log for room 323, and it showed the room was still vacant. Once again, my guard was up. I decided to place more towels outside room 325 again, just to avoid having to stand in front of room 323, even for a moment. If necessary, I was ready to face an angry guest. I went up to the third floor, and as I entered the hallway, everything seemed normal. I placed a large stack of towels outside room 325, and as soon as the towels touched the carpet, the hallway lights flickered out. Not all the lights, but just the bulbs in the middle of the hallway. The lights at both ends remained on. I stood frozen in panic, millions of thoughts racing through my head before I regained my composure. As I turned to run, all the lights in the hallway suddenly flashed on, blindingly bright to an unimaginable degree. The dazzling light disoriented me. All I remember is running backwards down the hallway, fearing something might rush out of room 323 to swallow me whole, or worse. One thing I noticed in the chaos was that the towels had vanished. I raced straight back to the front desk, where fortunately a guest had just stopped by and they started a normal conversation. This small talk helped me temporarily forget what had just happened, even if only for a few minutes. When the guest went up to their room, I immediately returned to my state of confusion. At some point, a thought flashed in my head. I quickly typed on the keyboard, checking the log for room 325. The room was registered under the name Mario Kennedy. This name stood out strangely. Before I could think further, the phone rang. Fortunately, the call came from room 225, so I didn't have to go back to that cursed third-floor hallway. But unfortunately, they were complaining about strange noises coming from the floor above, meaning room 325. I said I would call that room and ask them to keep quiet. I thought, over the phone, no one could harm me, right? I called room 325, and the call was picked up before it could even ring. It was a woman's voice. Hello. Hi, this is the front desk. The guests in the room below just complained about strange noises coming from upstairs, your room. This is just a polite reminder call. Please take care of the noise. Oh, of course. A strangely cheerful young woman's voice replied, and I was sure I had heard that voice somewhere before. Thank you. I hadn't even finished my sentence when the call was cut off. These people really didn't like saying goodbye. About an hour later, nothing happened. I got up to use the restroom, and when I returned, there were 2 checkout envelopes on the desk, one from room 323 and one from room 325. There were no additional notes, but all rating categories were marked 4, satisfactory. I debated the idea of going up to check if there were any signs that no one had ever been in those 2 rooms. After a while, a gut feeling told me everything was safe. I went up to the 3rd floor, making sure all the lights were on. I went to room 325, still unsure if I had the courage to enter room 323. What I hoped wouldn't happen did. When I opened the door to room 325, red lights spilled out, but it wasn't like the light I had seen from room 323. It was blood. I only opened the door a few inches, and what I saw was a deep crimson stain covering everything. That was enough for me. I rushed back to the front desk and called the police immediately. They arrived, went up to room 325 and checked it, and as always, they found nothing. Then they checked room 323 and discovered a large pile of towels in the bathtub, all soaking wet. Finally, there was proof that someone had been in the room. They reviewed the security camera footage, but there was no recording of me bringing towels to the 3rd floor. Once again, I apologized for wasting their time and again received positive feedback from sympathetic police officers. I sat back down at the computer where I had just tried to show the police Mario Kennedy's reservation, which of course had vanished from the system. I moved the mouse to exit the screensaver, and at that very moment, an image appeared. Room 325 was awash in blood. In the corner of the room were a young man and a young woman, both covered in blood from head to toe. All I could make out amidst the sea of red blood around them were their eyes and unnaturally white teeth. They were smiling, a horrifying, distorted grin. I quickly closed that horrific image. When I looked up from the front desk, I saw them. Those two stood right in front of me, their bodies covered in blood, their smiles still distorted, and their heavy breathing echoing in the silent space. I fainted. The next thing I remember, I was being tended to by paramedics. I asked what had happened, and a police officer said that, when he returned to get a signature on the statement I had just written, he saw me standing motionless in front of the desk for about 10 seconds before collapsing. I don't remember any of that. This was the first time I felt fear to my very bones. I began to doubt if I could continue working here. I decided to take a week off. During this time, nothing strange happened to me. I assumed I was stressed from working too many night shifts, occasionally interspersed with some day shifts, which completely messed up my sleep. However, during this week off, I took the time to delve deeper into the history of the Whitmore Hotel than when I first started working here. I will share what I found in the next update. Everyone wanted to know what happened on the third floor before the renovation was completed, besides the first story I told. So, below, I will briefly summarize the events. I was using the stairs one day, and since nothing had happened recently, I decided to check on the renovation progress. I noticed they had finished painting the walls and hung new lights, although no bulbs had been installed yet, so I only took a few steps into the hallway. When I turned back, the wooden ladder on my left had been straightened, blocking the doorway. I moved it aside and immediately went back downstairs. I remember one evening when I was waiting for my workday to end, and I had personally said goodbye to the construction crew. As I was packing up, I heard the distinct sound of tools. During the day, you could hear faint construction noises from the lobby and nearby floors when the crew worked from the lobby. You could also see the main hallway of the third floor, rooms 301 to 317. One night, I happened to look up and saw all the doors wide open. There was no light in any of the rooms, only enveloping darkness. I blinked, and each door from right to left, like dominoes, slammed shut. I'm not sure if this happened to every door on the third floor or just the ones within my sight, but either way, it was terrifying. I had received calls from various rooms on the third floor never from room 323 again, and when I picked up, all I heard was static. To some extent, I even stopped answering calls from that floor. So there you have it. I had more free time than ever during a week off I thought I deserved from the Whitmore Hotel. I spent the time catching up on sleep, binge-watching The Wire, aka the greatest television series ever created, and most importantly, deep diving into research on the Whitmore Hotel. I did some basic Google searches, but didn't really find anything remarkable. I mostly just found lists of famous or important figures who had stayed there and the hotel's basic history. The Whitmore Hotel was built from 1930 to 1931 during a development phase of the entire area where it's located. The owners were actually a group of businessmen, each funding a different part of the project. The hotel was named after one of their associates who had passed away during the planning phase. I researched each of them individually and found nothing particularly outstanding. They were just typical opportunistic businessmen. When it opened, this hotel was larger and more luxurious than any other hotel in the Midwest. It had 9 floors, a magnificent bar off the lobby with a lavish chandelier hanging above it. Over time, the hotel underwent many changes, including the addition of fitness rooms and a very large indoor pool area. In addition to these amenities, the rooms had also been renovated multiple times. Over the past decade or so, the hotel's business had gradually declined as hotel chains like Holiday Inn Express, La Quinta, and Days Inn opened new locations. Most guests now came here for the experience of staying in a historic hotel that had hosted many U.S. presidents during their terms. After reading all this, I felt quite disappointed, and I'm sure you do too. So, thank you for your patience. I paused to look a bit more, but something was nagging at me. I went back to research the names of the hotel's sponsors and discovered a common thread. They all started their careers at a now-defunct investment firm from 1996 called the Kennedy Conglomerate. Now we're getting somewhere. I looked up information about the Kennedy Conglomerate and found a basic history, which I won't bore you by recounting in detail, except that it was located on the west coast of the United States. The interesting thing about the Kennedy conglomerate was that in its final years before dissolution, it was run by the founder's grandson, Mario Kennedy. When I researched Mario Kennedy, I learned a lot more about what I was dealing with. Most of what I read was rumors passed down through many people, so I wasn't sure what was true. However, if they were true, they could certainly explain what was happening around me. Mario Kennedy was a true playboy. He had all the money in the world but didn't use it for anything responsible. Mario invested in many businesses, most of which failed. He spent money on drugs, women, alcohol, cars, and properties that he later neglected and let fall into disrepair. Then one day, he met Marion. According to the story, the day Mario met Marion was the day he gave up all his bad habits. He dropped everything immediately. They got married the same day they met, and Mario and Marion spent the next few weeks in the tropics, not telling anyone where they had gone. When they returned, everything in the business was in chaos. Mario did the most selfish thing possible. He liquidated the entire company, leaving his employees to fend for themselves. At this point, he and Marion had nothing left to hinder their relationship. Things got interesting when I read that Marion was a member of a cult called the Congregation of His Infernal Divinity. This was not exactly a Satan-worshipping religion, but rather one that worshipped various types of demons. This church was said to be a small group of young, upper-class individuals in California. Part of this cult's practices involved kidnapping and sacrificing children. I won't go into detail, but what I read was sickening. Again, I tried to remain skeptical of what I was reading, but let me continue. Marion brought Mario into this sick group, and he quickly assimilated. They held an initiation ritual where Mario tracked a 9-year-old boy, kidnapped him from his home in the middle of the night, and killed him at one of the cult's temples. Mario, rumor had it, quickly climbed the ranks in the Chid cult, with Marion always close behind. However, Mario's flamboyant and extravagant lifestyle began to return, making him careless. Information about the Congregation of His Infernal Divinity leaked, and the cult was eventually dismantled. Its members were arrested and put on trial. Most received the death penalty, except for 2, Mario and Marion Kennedy. In a nationwide manhunt, they were finally cornered at the Whitmore Hotel, where I now live. It said they kidnapped a child from another family staying at the hotel, killed the boy in the room, covered themselves in the child's blood, and then both committed suicide. The incident happened in '96. The article didn't specify which room this happened in, but I think it's not hard to guess. Despite such a dark Kennedy history, the Whitmore Hotel had never received any complaints or accusations of being haunted. As I said, when I researched the hotel upon starting my job, I found nothing. No ghost stories, no phantoms, nothing. And as someone asked in the comments, no other employees reported seeing anything strange. At this point, I started to think I was going crazy. But at the same time, what I had experienced was very real, very convincing. Furthermore, I've always had good mental health. I have no history of schizophrenia or delusions. I felt as if all of this was happening to me for some reason. When I returned to the hotel the following week, I decided I would try to endure and find out what the hell was going on and why it was happening to me. My next experience with room 323 provided some answers, and looking back, I truly wish I had never found them. But before that happened, I was back at the Whitmore to start my first shift after my break. It was a Thursday day shift, and my task with a colleague was to be a lifeguard in the indoor pool area. The girl assigned to be my fellow lifeguard called in sick, and the only other person trained as a lifeguard started their vacation the very day I returned to work. We were severely short-staffed, so I sat on the high chair, observing and basically just relaxing for the first 5 hours. Around 1:00 p.m., I suddenly felt very tired for no apparent reason. I had slept a lot during my week off, so a day shift should have been nothing, but the fatigue hit me like a slap in the face. My eyelids felt heavy, almost pulling my head down, second by second. Suddenly, I jolted awake, like when you nod off in class, snapping up and looking around to make sure no one saw. What I saw next was etched into my mind. Everyone in the pool area was floating face down in the water, moving very slowly with some unknown current. I realized that all the bodies were completely still, with no struggle or attempt to swim, and in addition, some of the bodies were bloated as if they had been underwater for a long time. I climbed down from the chair, completely overwhelmed by what I was witnessing. Had all these people drowned while I dozed off? That was completely illogical. I knew for sure I hadn't slept so deeply that two people could die without my knowledge. It wasn't until I took a few steps along the edge of the pool that I noticed the eerie silence, just like the time I experienced the disappearance in Chapter 2. As soon as I realized it, I started to feel disoriented. I stumbled, almost falling into the pool, but managed to regain my balance just in time. At that moment, I saw something else unusual. A woman dressed in black was crouching in the far corner, diagonally across the pool from me. She was giggling, but her laughter was very faint, just enough to break the ominous silence. I tried to yell at her, but I couldn't hear my own voice. Her eerie, choked laughter was the only sound that existed in my horrified consciousness. At this point, I felt a light tap on my shoulder. I turned and immediately came face to face with a man less than an inch from me. I only saw him for a brief moment, but I was certain he was the same man I had first seen standing in the corner of the blood-soaked room in the photo of room 325, and then standing in front of me at the front desk before I fainted during the events in Chapter 3. I recognized him instantly from his distorted smile, his unnaturally wide, white teeth on his face. I was startled to my core, my instinct making me recoil, and I fell backward into the watery grave that was now the Whitmore pool. I struggled to get to the surface, but the bodies seemed to have drifted towards me as soon as I fell, submerging me beneath the water. I thrashed helplessly underwater, the light gradually fading as I felt my last breaths leaving my lungs. It was at that moment I jolted awake. I looked around, now fully alert, and everyone was as they had been before I felt sleepy. Children were playing at the shallow end, adults were frolicking in the deep end, right below my feet. I looked towards the far corner where the woman had been giggling, but no one was there. I could have dismissed this as a nightmare if it weren't for one unexplainable fact. My entire body was soaking wet from head to toe. The incident at the pool left me extremely unsettled. There was no logical explanation for why I was drenched when I hadn't even entered the water. I summarized everything that had happened so far: the red light from room 323, the event where everyone vanished, the towel incident, the photograph, fainting, and now the pool incident, plus a few minor things I mentioned in Chapter 4. All of this told me one thing: I still hadn't been directly attacked or harmed in any way. Even the pool incident, which I guess you could call a dream, Mario Kennedy didn't push me. He just startled me, and that made me fall backwards into the water. Neither he nor the woman I assume was Marion Kennedy ever directly touched me. I should also clarify one thing. I never directly asked any colleagues if they had experienced anything strange regarding room 323, the third floor, or the hotel in general, because I didn't want to be thought of as crazy. Instead, I chose to listen and see if anyone would mention anything themselves, but no one ever did. And when I assigned colleagues tasks that required them to go to the third floor, they showed no reaction or hesitation. So, I believed that only I was being affected by whatever was happening here. That being said, I decided that I would find out what was going on. I know this is the classic horror movie scenario of walking straight into danger. My only explanation is that when this truly happens to you, you almost can't resist the urge to find out the truth. I knew something was happening, but I needed asterisk to know why it was happening. With that determination, I waited for my second night shift the following week. Nothing significant happened over the weekend, except for a few doors closing on their own and computers restarting. I instructed the day shift staff not to book rooms on the third floor unless absolutely necessary, in an effort to protect anyone from potential risks. On Monday night, I had just finished assisting a new guest, assigning them to the second floor. It was past 2:00 a.m. when the bar was empty of guests. I said goodbye to the bartender and put up the "Be right back" sign at the front desk. I went up to the third floor. I always had an irrational fear of elevators, so you might notice I never mention using them. I headed towards the hallway where room 323 was. As soon as I turned the corner into the hallway, all the lights between the two ends went out, as usual whenever I entered this area. As before, my consciousness now seemed to be enveloped by a frightening silence. There was no sound save for the suffocating quiet. I won't lie to you, I was extremely scared. I had to summon all my strength to continue investigating this mystery. I took deep breaths with each slow step as I delved deeper into the dark hallway, each step bringing me closer to the darkness. When I reached room 327, every symptom of fear hit me like a train straight on. Cold sweat drenched my back, the hair on my neck and arms stood on end, as if taking orders from a military trainer. My breathing became shallow, as if the air had suddenly thinned, like I was standing on a mountaintop. My mind was flooded with potential scenarios, because I had no idea what I was walking into. Now I was standing in front of room 325. I hesitated, not daring to go further until I turned to look behind me. There was only a solid wall about 3 feet behind me, painted with the same pattern as the rest of the hallway. I was at the point of no return. I turned back and saw another wall directly in front of me, just a few inches from the door to room 323. Facing the fact that I now had no other choice, I resolved to continue. I was only a few steps away, but each centimeter felt like a mile. I lifted my right foot to step when I heard a door creak open. Doors at the Whitmore never creaked, so now, in retrospect, I feel like this small sound was added just to scare me more. I decided that since I was stuck in this situation anyway, I took 3 long strides and faced room 323. The red light I had first seen when experiencing this room returned. If you remember, that light definitely came from a bulb, not from blood, as was the case with room 325 in Chapter 3. The red light spread into the dark hallway, and I felt the heat escaping from the room. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and gently pushed the door open. I didn't know what I was expecting. Half of me thought I would be pulled into the room and brutally murdered by evil spirits, child-killing cultists. The other half thought I would pass out from sheer terror and adrenaline overload. I opened my eyes and saw the bulb in the room emitting a red light. I cautiously stepped inside and saw nothing, no one. You know that feeling when someone is near you, even if you haven't seen them? I had absolutely no such feeling. I very slowly and carefully walked further into the room. An antique-style woman's outfit was neatly folded on a chair in the corner of the room, and a very handsome, extremely expensive-looking men's suit was hanging on the slightly ajar bedroom door. I looked around the room, and it took me a moment to realize that this room was different from the others in the hotel. It was furnished as if it hadn't been changed in 20 years. That meant since 1996. It made sense. I tiptoed to the bedroom door. As my fingertip barely brushed it to push it open, the TV in the living room flickered on. The static and white noise assaulted my senses, dazing me. When I regained my composure, I realized the screen was showing a Super 8 video recording of the hotel basement. The camera panned to the storage area in the back and focused on a stack of newspapers, as if inviting me to check their contents. Then the TV screen abruptly went black. At this moment, the feeling of knowing someone was near appeared, clear and intense. I spun around, and they were there. Mario and Marion Kennedy standing in front of the now-closed door, their faces a stark contrast to the hideous smiles I had seen before. This time, their faces bore distorted expressions of anger, as if they were extremely displeased that I had entered their home. Just as Mario began to step towards me, I lunged into the bedroom and slammed the door shut. In a panic, I flicked the light switch, but the room lit up with the same red light as the room I had just escaped. Even more surprisingly, I saw another door in the room, not a closet door, as the closet door was to my right and wide, open with clothes scattered on the floor, but another large door, opposite me on the wall next to the large California king bed that took up most of the room's space. Before I could react, Mario and Marion began pounding on the door violently, while Marion's insane laughter echoed, as if she was gleefully enjoying the fear she knew she was inflicting. I mustered all the energy in my body to run to the door on the other side of the room, but it was like a horror movie nightmare. The room suddenly stretched out into a long hallway, and with each step I ran, the door was always just out of my reach. I heard the door behind me burst open, and when I turned my head, I saw Mario and Marion floating, not running, but sliding along the ground as if on a rail, with those terrifying smiles once again back on their distorted faces. They approached me quickly. I don't know how or by what means, but as I desperately prayed to any higher power that I would reach the door, I did. Just as the Kennedy couple almost reached me, I grabbed the doorknob, pushed it down, and opened it into another hotel room. As I tried to jump inside, a searing hot hand grabbed my left wrist. In a swift motion, I yanked my arm away from the hand, and when I turned back, I saw it was Marion Kennedy, and I lunged forward. I stumbled into the room and immediately turned back to close and lock the door behind me. I sat with my back against the door as Mario and Marion began pounding on it again. I took a deep breath and began to look around. I was in room 325. I had completely forgotten that rooms 323 and 325 were connected by a door, a common design for two families traveling together, each having their own room but conveniently connected by a door so they could move freely between them. Realizing this, I concluded that I was no safer here than I had been in room 323. I had seen this room awash in blood with the Kennedy couple standing in the corner, so clearly, this was not unfamiliar territory for them. You have to understand, I knew almost nothing about what I was dealing with. I didn't know what they wanted. I didn't know why it was me. I didn't know the extent of their abilities. I didn't know if they could freely roam the hotel or were confined to rooms 323 and 325 and the pool area. All I knew at this point was that I was definitely in a room they could infiltrate, and when I looked down at my left wrist, I noticed a faint burn mark in the shape of a hand. This proved they could actually physically harm me. I did the most logical thing possible. I ran to the door leading to the hallway, silently praying that when it opened, it wouldn't be a solid wall. Fortunately, it wasn't. I rushed into the hallway, my mind clouded by a terrifying mixture of darkness, silence broken only by the pounding on the door in the room behind me, and fear. I ran to the left, towards the light at the end of the hallway. When I reached the light, I looked back. Mario and Marion Kennedy were standing outside room 323, side by side, both smiling and waving. I continued running until I reached the lobby. To my surprise, the guest I had checked in about 15 minutes earlier was standing at the front desk with all her luggage, and the bartender was still at the bar serving a round of drinks to a few guests. I tiredly stepped behind the front desk, glanced at the clock. It read 1:59 a.m. and the guest spoke up. "Well," she said, clearly annoyed. "Well, what? Do you have any rooms with a balcony? I don't understand why you don't check the computer. Don't you know which rooms have them or not?" "Oh yes, I'm sorry, it's just look, I don't care, just get it done. I'm very tired and I have a lot to do tomorrow. I need to sleep." How long had I been gone? Why did I tell her I needed to check for a room with a balcony when she was right? I could totally check the computer. I was utterly confused. "Of course, ma'am, I apologize." I proceeded to check her in, gave her the key card for room 239, and sent her on her way with understandable fatigue. By this time, the guests at the bar had finished their drinks, and the bartender started putting glasses into the dishwasher. As they went back to their rooms, he turned on the wash cycle and turned off the bar lights. In a strange sense of déjà vu, we said our goodbyes exactly as I was certain I had done less than 15 minutes before. I reflected on what had just happened, a few things I had learned, and what I needed to do next. I decided that on my next night shift, which would be Tuesday night leading into Wednesday morning, I would go down to the basement to find out what the TV in room 323 was trying to show me. I figured I had come this far. Why stop now? Perhaps you'd say I'm quite stubborn. I needed to know why this was happening to me. In short, this whole incident was messing with my head. Had I just imagined the entire nightmare? Like the pool incident, I might have thought so, if it weren't for the faint but throbbing hand-shaped burn mark wrapped around my left wrist. The morning after the incident with Mario and Marion, I finished my shift and went home, where sleep was no longer a part of my life. I sat there, thinking about what I should do when I went down to the basement, the dangers I might face, what I might find, and so on. After a long internal debate, I decided to postpone going down to the basement. I didn't want to be the first character to die in a horror movie just because I was reckless enough to go looking for the killer. That was the initial plan, but that plan changed when I stepped into my next night shift. I tried to keep busy with work, reading through the day manager's notes, checking the reservation book, doing some random tasks on the computer, but as I was working on the computer, of course, something else happened. The screen once again displayed the image of the blood-soaked room 325 with the Kennedy couple grinning in the corner. Only this time, it was different. This time, I was lying in the middle of the floor, my whole body also covered in blood. I was lying on my side in a fetal position, and it didn't look like I was doing it willingly. I tried to take a screenshot of the computer with my phone, but the result was just a blurry red smudge. As I looked at the photo, trying to find anything useful, the burn mark on my wrist started to sting. I looked down and saw the burn glowing faintly, just enough for me to see the weak light through the white bandage I had wrapped around it. I shook my head, trying to ward off the discomfort. Then an idea struck me, to print the screen from the computer. I executed the correct key combination and turned back as the printer started working. As I turned around, I found myself face to face with Mario Kennedy. He placed his hand on my bicep, and his face, with that grotesque smile, transformed into a wide, distorted mouth, letting out a piercing shriek that threatened to burst my eardrums. Before I could comprehend what was happening, it was all over, and I found myself facing the bartender, who was gripping my shoulder and shaking me vigorously. "Hey, stop it," I woke up. What is it?" I wasn't sure what I was asking. "You were standing here for about 30 seconds, staring into space, then suddenly you screamed. You wouldn't wake up. Are you okay? Do you need me to call an ambulance?" No, I'm sorry, I just had a little panic. I'm fine, thank you." "Are you sure?" he asked, sounding unconvinced. "Yeah, really, I'm fine. Thanks for bringing me back to reality." I tried to force a smile, a dry and forced laugh. The bartender returned to the bar, occasionally glancing back to make sure I was okay. I saw the guests at the bar whispering to each other about what had just happened. I felt genuinely embarrassed. I went into the back room and took off my shirt, standing in front of the mirror hanging there. I checked my bicep and shoulder. As I said, Mario had gripped my bicep, and the bartender had held my shoulder. There were no marks from the bartender, but on my bicep were finger-shaped bruises. I figured at least that was better than a burn. I grabbed a flashlight from the utility closet and navigated the labyrinthine hallways on the first floor to the door leading to the basement. The door opened to a long, 3-segment staircase leading to a large but unfinished basement. I turned on the light and began to descend. When I reached the first landing, I heard the automatic lock on the door above click shut. Damn it, this is starting to look like a bad idea, but I continued. I reached the second landing, and the lights flickered a few times before going out completely. Damn it again, this really is a stupid idea. I turned on my flashlight, now feeling lucky to have brought it, and continued down the last few creaking steps, the sound echoing throughout the basement. The air down here was heavy and damp, like an invisible weight was pressing down on me, as if gravity worked stronger here than usual. For a moment, I felt like the strange silence I had become accustomed to when investigating this mystery was back, but I realized it wasn't. The basement was simply too quiet. The only sound I heard was the furnace in the far left corner of the large space. Along the walls were storage areas, some empty, some containing cleaning supplies, snow blowers and snow shovels, some full of old blankets and bed sheets. The area I had seen in the video from room 323 was in the far right corner. I knew this because the camera angle in the video showed the stack of newspapers in the storage area just to the left of that corner. I slowly made my way towards it, hoping to find some information or answers, because this hotel had proven time and again that unpredictable things could happen at any moment. I walked very carefully. I guess the flashlight battery hadn't been changed in a long time, as no one really needed to use it. Thus, only a small path in front of me was illuminated. Each small step I took echoed between the concrete walls, each tiny rustle my feet made sounded amplified, until suddenly there was no sound at all. It happened again. The silence. My desire to know what awaited me in the basement wrestled with my reason until curiosity won. I continued forward, then abruptly to my left, in an empty storage compartment with an open door, lay a woman face down on the floor. It wasn't Marion, because this woman had brown hair. Marion had blonde. I decided to ignore it and continue. I took about 2 steps past the storage compartment when I turned back. The woman was now standing behind me, emerging from the compartment in a stance as if ready to lunge. But it wasn't a random woman. It was a rotting, putrid figure of my mother. Her skin hung loose on her face like peeled banana skin, dried blood caked around her cracked lips, her eyes cloudy, bloodshot, and empty. She gasped for air. "What the hell?" I blurted out. I knew my mom was at home and fine. I had just texted her not long ago. This was definitely some kind of hallucination, but foolishly I decided to check. I stood still, waiting to see what she would do. She lunged her arm towards me, and her long, horrible fingernails ripped my polo shirt. Okay, not a hallucination, got it. I turned my back and ran. When I looked back, my mother started to chase me but ran into some invisible wall. I saw her face distort as if she'd been hit by a frying pan, then she fell to the cold floor. She immediately sprang up, trying to get to me, but something blocked her path, preventing her from getting through. She moved as if trapped in an invisible box. I was beyond confused, but I kept going, faster this time. As I passed another empty storage compartment, a sudden wave of heat slammed into me, throwing me to the left. I hit the wall, just barely holding onto the flashlight. The impact dazed me. My vision temporarily blurred, but I could clearly see Mario and Marion floating towards me with their familiar smiles. They stopped a few feet from me, and in the blink of an eye, the expressions on their faces became blank. "It will be easier for all of us if you just let us do what needs to be done." I didn't know how to react. "Yesterday, we almost had you in the room, but you got away. Do you know how angry my Marion was?" I looked at Marion, her face immediately contorted into pure rage. "We'll get you eventually. Just make things easier and come to room 325 so we can do what needs to be done. Stop playing these cat and mouse games." I was stunned that they were finally talking to me instead of just random things happening to fill my existence. "Do what? Why me?" I choked out, asking. Mario and Marion burst into maniacal laughter. "Because you're the chosen one, you fool," Marion shrieked. "What the hell is the chosen one? Chosen for what?" The barrage of questions tumbled out of my mouth. Suddenly, Mario and Marion vanished and the quiet sounds of the basement returned. I had absolutely no idea what was going on. They vanished, my zombie mother vanished, the sounds returned to normal, and I had no clue. I checked my phone and saw that time was passing normally. There were no more glitches in time or space. That at least was a good thing. I looked down at the tear in my shirt. It was still there. I was still drenched in sweat from the waves of heat that accompanied the Kennedy couple. All of this had truly just happened. I stood up, dusting myself off. I would finally reach the corner of the basement. Without further hesitation, I hurried to the first storage compartment on the left of the corner. Inside was a stack of newspapers, just as the TV in room 323 had shown. Beside the stack of newspapers was a piece of paper with the words, "These must stay here." From what I could see, the newspapers were dated 1926, 1930, and 1996. Let me summarize the information I found in them. This is not a verbatim account, as I had no way to transcribe all the information down at the time. 1926. Enoch Phelps, investment banker, arrested in kidnapping case. From this article, I understood that Enoch Phelps was a founding member of the Kennedy conglomerate. He, along with Wilson Kennedy, George Wilhelm, and Marco Esperanza, had founded the Congregation of His Infernal Divinity. To put it bluntly, this was the name they used to cover up the fact that they were psychopaths, a reason to kidnap children and sacrifice them to whatever they believed in. In 1926, someone tipped off authorities about the whereabouts of missing children. They went to a location owned by a female friend of Enoch Phelps. This woman implicated Enoch, and he was arrested in connection with the kidnapping. Subsequent articles explained that he was tried and sentenced to 15 years in prison, but died in prison from respiratory failure. Asterisk 1930, Arthur Whitmore missing. Arthur Whitmore was declared dead after months with no leads. These were two separate articles, and this is where the big reveal came. Somehow, Arthur Whitmore disappeared in the fall of 1930 during the planning phase of the still unnamed hotel construction project. It was suspected he was murdered because he had a happy life on the West Coast and was very much looking forward to being involved in this big project. After months and countless resources spent searching, Arthur was declared dead when nothing was found but the jacket he was last seen wearing. Discovered in the Rocky Mountains, a handkerchief with his name embroidered on it was found in the breast pocket, helping to confirm his identity. His colleagues decided to name the hotel they were building after him in his honor. But what caught my attention was the next line. Arthur Whitmore left behind his pregnant wife, Elaine Whitmore, maiden name Beddock. Wait, Elaine. That's my mother's name. I thought about this for a moment until I remembered that my mother was named after her great-grandmother. Arthur Whitmore was my great-grandfather. After Arthur died, Elaine married someone else after giving birth to my great-grandmother, but that marriage didn't last, and she reverted to her maiden name. No woman on my maternal side of the family ever remarried, a huge taboo at the time, so I was born with the Bedic surname. Now I knew my connection to this hotel, and perhaps why I was being targeted, but I still didn't understand what my visit to room 323 would achieve. Asterisk 1996. Horrific scene at Whitmore Hotel. One child, two suspects found dead in room with signs of ritualistic murder-suicide. This article explained the story, though not as detailed as what I had read online about the Mario and Marion Kennedy case. Honestly, I didn't find much more useful information from this article, but at least it confirmed what was true and what was just online rumor. The useful thing I found was what lay beneath the newspapers: a box of yellow notepads with frantic, red ink scribblings that seemed meaningless. I flipped through the pages, trying to understand them, but couldn't, until I realized the first 3 pages were some kind of code. Unfortunately, I never deciphered them. I'll tell you that up front. However, from the 4th page onward, it was a detailed list of every activity of the congregation of his infernal divinity. Pages and pages of information about ritualistic murders, victims, locations, and their impact on businesses from ancient times. All the information stopped in 1996. Let's pick this up tomorrow. I'll share everything I learned about the congregation of his infernal divinity and how it relates to the Whitmore Hotel, my family, and myself. A warning: this is where things get really, really weird. I sat in the basement, staring at the yellow notebooks that seemed to contain all the information about the congregation of his infernal divinity that anyone could ever want. I'll try to relay this information to the best of my memory, and before you ask, I tried to take pictures of them, but they just came out like the screenshot I took earlier of the computer. A blurry smudge with the dominant color of the image, in this case, yellow. The initial idea for the congregation of his infernal divinity was conceived by an eccentric member of the first generation of the Kennedy conglomerate. Before the conglomerate was even formed, Wilson Kennedy, along with his friends Marco Esperanza, Enoch Phelps, and George Wilhelm, held a meeting at a lavish supper club called the Benedict. There, he proposed the Bible of the book they would follow. Wilson Kennedy chose to worship Ruel, an entity born from the combined blood of the demons Clonex, Phallar, Moloch, Kronos, and Barbas. Clonex was a demon who could grant power and wealth. Phallar was the patron god of wrath and murder. Moloch, one of the worst and most terrifying demons, was the leader of the hellish army, demanding the lives of innocents, especially children. Kronos controlled time and space. Finally, Barbas, the demon of fear. The result of their blood mixing, born through a virgin child, was Ruel. Ruel was a purely evil demon, representing absolute chaos. He promised boundless wealth to his followers, but in return, he demanded the blood of innocent children. Anyone who failed to fulfill their duties to him would be punished in the most horrific ways. Wilson Kennedy summoned this entity through a ritual that made him appear and speak to him through a mirror, where both sides made offers and negotiated terms. Ultimately, Kennedy was promised infinite wealth in exchange for the blood of a child and a commitment that he would recruit another to make the same deal. To gain more assets, they needed to offer more children and recruit more people. Kennedy recounted to his colleagues how Ruel was born and how he himself had achieved astonishing wealth, surprising them and making them half-believers. He invited them to summon Ruel themselves in separate summoning sessions held over the next week. Each acknowledged Kennedy's contribution in introducing them to this demon. Ruel offered the same terms to each man, and all happily accepted. In another meeting, a few days after completing the summoning rituals, these men decided to form the Kennedy conglomerate, a place to hide all of Ruel's followers under the guise of legitimate businessmen, while in reality, all were members of the congregation of his infernal divinity. Each of them found a close friend or colleague to recruit. The recruited individuals did the same. When the children of the original members reached an appropriate age to make a pact with Ruel, they were brought into the fold, and so the cult continued to grow from generation to generation. One of the recruited business associates was Arthur Whitmore, a close friend and partner of Enoch Phelps, one of the founding members of the Chid Kennedy conglomerate. Calm and composed, Arthur Whitmore reluctantly accepted a vague invitation to an initiation ritual. What he witnessed shook his mind. This ritual was described in detail, almost as if someone was transcribing a business meeting. This transcript was accompanied by several blurry Polaroid photos to further illustrate what was written. The Wayne Francis Cousins Initiation Ritual, ***. As each member was initiated, they had to describe how they had captured the child they would sacrifice to atone for Ruel. Wayne Cousins began by tracking his mistress's 9-year-old niece. He took 2 weeks off work to memorize the girl's every move. When not secretly tracking, he encouraged his mistress to spend time with her sister's family, where he could closely observe his first victim. After 2 weeks, he went to his mistress's sister's house just before dark, incapacitated her sister and brother-in-law, then knocked the 9-year-old girl unconscious. He carried the limp body of the girl to his car and drove off into the night, heading to a predetermined safe house to keep the child until they were brought to the church. The church, as I learned, was an underground complex about half a mile from the Kennedy conglomerate's main headquarters, accessible only through a connecting tunnel between the two locations. It was a large underground complex with a huge ballroom where rituals were held in the center. Upon arriving at the church, the person would stand at one of 3 long pews. Then, from behind a closed door, a bodyguard would bring out the child, immediately closing the door behind him. He would lead the blindfolded child onto the stage, where the exit door was located at the back. On the stage was a metal platform with hundreds of small holes covered by decorative drapes. Beneath the platform was a sliding tray. I learned this tray was used to collect blood, and beneath the tray was a fire pit. On a freestanding wall to the right of the platform was a collection of blades. The child was admired by the crowd in the pews before being covered with a white cloth and finally laid down on the platform, with their wrists and ankles tied to small stakes at either end of the table-like surface. The founding members of the congregation then emerged from the door where the child and bodyguard had entered, wearing black and red hooded robes. 2 of the 4 stood on each side of the platform and began reciting a chant that was echoed by the crowd. I couldn't remember the exact content of the response. Then Wayne Cousins emerged from the room behind, wearing a blue hooded robe. A series of questions were asked and answered between the 4 Kennedy conglomerate members and Cousins. Wayne Francis Cousins, have you, after all, accepted the terms that Ruel has laid out? Yes, I accept. Do you believe that Ruel has adhered to the terms of your agreement? Yes, I believe. Are you prepared to offer atonement to Ruel in exchange for his generosity? Yes, I am prepared. Do you accept that any failure to fulfill your obligations to Ruel will result in him bringing down upon you the most terrible vengeance? Yes, I accept. Then, without further delay, let the sacrifice begin. Wayne walked to the wall and chose a blade. It was a long, slender knife, curved at the tip with a serrated edge. The child writhed beneath the white cloth, trying to escape the restraints around their hands and feet. Wayne dragged the blade along the cloth from the child's feet up to their forehead. He brought the blade back to the child's body, held it there for a moment, then slowly stabbed it through the cloth and into her body. According to the transcript, her screams echoed throughout the ballroom, louder than any previous victim. Blood began to seep through the white cloth as she screamed and struggled in pain. Wayne pulled the knife from her body, then began to stab her frantically from top to bottom, all over her face and neck. After a while, she died from her injuries. Wayne bowed, then returned to the main platform, handing the knife back to the bodyguard, who wiped it clean with a rag and returned it to its place on the wall. Then they recited more chants that I don't clearly remember. Wayne then pulled out the sliding tray full of blood. It was like a large mixing bowl on a rail. Wilson Kennedy spoke, "We now offer the body and blood of this innocent, beautiful child in the name of Wayne Francis Cousins to the Almighty." The other 4 men standing around the platform joined him, "As he has given to us, so we shall give back to him." Kennedy lit a match and threw it down into what was presumably pre-soaked wood beneath the platform. Flames erupted violently, consuming the child's lifeless body. As the fire raged, the crowd, along with the 5 men on stage, chanted a hymn. When the body and cloth were charred black and the flames began to subside, the blood was poured onto the body first to extinguish any remaining flames on the covered corpse. Then the platform was slid away from the fire pit, and the remaining blood was poured into the pit to extinguish the fire. After the ritual was complete, everyone cheered, shook hands, and embraced Wayne in congratulations, except for Arthur Whitmore. The notes described him with words like treacherous bastard, cowardly devotee, rotten traitor, and many other insults. Then I continued to read about what happened to Arthur Whitmore. Apparently, he had pretended to be very enthusiastic about becoming a member of the congregation of his infernal divinity. He performed the summoning ritual under the supervision of his godfather, Enoch Phelps, and attended a practice sacrificial ritual. He was informed that he had 1 month to kidnap and deliver his chosen victim to a location that would be revealed on the night he planned to carry out the kidnapping. For the next 3 weeks, Arthur fabricated details about a boy he pretended to be tracking. He told a made-up story about the boy's schedule, what his family was like, what the boy liked to play, all the information one could gather through secret surveillance. It was the first day of the last week that Arthur Whitmore had to execute the kidnapping of his victim. In the meantime, he had attended 2 other sacrificial rituals, as attending all rituals was a mandatory requirement for a prospective member joining the congregation. The very ritual held that night made him completely unable to bear it anymore. The victim this time was a newborn baby boy. The participant in the ritual was a woman who had waited for months until her neighbor gave birth. On the night the young mother returned home from the hospital, she snuck into the house and kidnapped the newborn. Arthur was horrified, witnessing the newborn brutally killed and burned right before his eyes. After the ceremony, he told Enoch Phelps that tonight would be the night he carried out his kidnapping. Enoch told him to go home and wait for a phone call to receive the address of the safe house he would have to take the victim to. Arthur drove home quickly, sat by the phone with a paper and pen. He received the call shortly after arriving, wrote down the address, and immediately called the police department, reporting that kidnapped children were being held at the address he had just received. The police rescued 6 children held captive at the home of Ruth Harmon, Enoch Phelps' mistress. Under pressure, Ruth confessed to her lover's involvement in the conspiracy. In the subsequent trial, Phelps was sentenced to 15 years in prison for kidnapping, while Ruth Harmon received an 8-year sentence for her role in the incident. Based on information from Arthur Whitmore, the police found the secret church of the congregation, but found no trace of sacrificed children or any evidence proving that murders had ever occurred. Although the church and other members of the congregation escaped prosecution, supposedly thanks to powerful connections, Arthur was almost immediately blamed. Not long after the trial ended, he disappeared without a trace. What I read next shed a lot of light on what I was dealing with. Arthur Whitmore was taken on a private train to the Midwest by the founding members of CHID and some loyal followers. Somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, the group stopped and tortured Arthur, leaving his jacket behind. A handkerchief with his name embroidered on it was found in the breast pocket, helping to identify the owner. Then they continued their journey to the land they had just purchased, where the hotel was to be built, then just a large field. They summoned Ruel to witness the death of the man who had summoned him, but then openly betrayed him, costing him countless offerings. Ruel cursed Arthur's bloodline, decreeing that every male descendant of his would be cursed. Ruel explained that no one had ever summoned him, and then refused to carry out the pact before bringing an offering or a new recruit. This was a significant event. The curse he placed on Arthur Whitmore meant that each death of Arthur's descendants would allow Ruel to walk the earth for 1 day, and as implied, the damage he could inflict in a single day was horrific. Ruel also declared that one day, a chosen one would join the congregation. He would grant this person the privilege of remaining on earth after death with a single purpose. He prophesied that a Whitmore descendant would set foot on the land where their ancestor was sacrificed. When that happened, the soul of the chosen one would have to sacrifice the Whitmore descendant, thereby allowing Ruel to walk the earth for 1 day. I read on. After the police raided the safe house, the church ceased operations for a while, except for Arthur Whitmore's sacrifice. Many years later, it was revived by the sons of the founding members of the Kennedy conglomerate and thus passed down through generations. Over the years, countless children were kidnapped and murdered. To avoid suspicion, members seeking victims for their first sacrifice often traveled to other states for weeks, choosing victims in places unrelated to where they lived. One person who didn't want to join the congregation was Mario Kennedy. He had everything he wanted in life. He didn't need to summon demons for more wealth or power. This lasted until he met Marion. Marion was brought into the cult by her mother. In her summoning ritual, Ruel declared that Marion was the chosen one. He said that Marion would one day find a lover willing to submit to her every whim, and together they would take the cult to new heights. As you know, things didn't turn out that way. The lover she found was Mario. Mario became so obsessed with killing children that he eventually exposed the cult and caused its downfall. Ruel was not pleased with this. He threatened to banish Mario to hell and surely would have, if not for Marion's pleas to allow her and Mario to remain on Earth after death, so Mario could have a chance at redemption by participating in the sacrifice of the Whitmore descendant. Ruel agreed. According to rumors among the cult members in custody, Ruel and the Kennedys fell into a dormant state, only to be awakened when the Whitmore descendant set foot on that land. That was the last of the yellow papers. I was utterly bewildered. I stood up too quickly and felt dizzy. I closed my eyes for a moment. When I opened them, I found myself standing in the middle of a vast field. I froze in fear. Footsteps on the cold grass behind me echoed. I turned around. A man I had never seen before stood in front of me. If it weren't for me, all your colleagues in the hotel would have been a quick feast for Ruel a long time ago. What? Don't you think it's strange that no one else sees the things you've seen? Yeah, well, I've been in this hotel for a very long time, Nicholas. Who are you? Arthur Whitmore. I didn't know what to say. Just a week and a half ago, I had never seen a ghost, and now I was in the middle of a bizarre conspiracy involving a child-sacrificing demon cult with a demon waiting to walk the earth. What was the point of all this? Clearly, I'm not supposed to die so the demon can't appear, but what if I leave the hotel? Can they follow me? The Kennedys and Ruel have been dormant for the past 20 years. That's long enough for their powers to wane, but it also means they need time to restore their former power. Their interactions with you have become more intense over time, haven't they? That's right. When they regain their full power, the Kennedys will be free to act. Through my efforts, I have kept them contained within this hotel and limited their influence to only you, no one else. But soon, they will be free to roam and kill again, something they haven't done in 2 decades and will be extremely eager to do. They will not stop to satisfy Ruel, and that means they will never stop hunting you. You must stop them. And how am I supposed to do that? I asked, half wanting to give up and end my own life. If I was going to die soon anyway, I'd rather shoot myself in the head than be stabbed to death, have my body burned, and my blood poured over the corpse, right? You must arm yourself with holy relics and sacrifice Mario and Marion Kennedy. Sacrificing his own demons will show him that you are a formidable opponent, and he will abandon his pursuit of you. He will wait in hell to be summoned again, seeking a new path to walk the earth. So, I take a bunch of crosses and what else? Go into room 323 or 325 and yell, "The power of Christ compels you." And they'll just lie down like, "Oh, it's time to get stabbed." Perhaps it's not as difficult as you think. I blinked and suddenly I was back in the basement. The papers were gone. I was bewildered beyond measure. I wasn't a demon hunter, I was just a flexible hotel employee at a failing historic hotel. I recalled my job application. I was almost certain this wasn't in the job description. I reflected on my life, nothing even a fraction as complex and dramatic as this had ever happened to me. I thought about everything. I decided I would see this through. I would heed my ancestors' advice and save countless lives from horrific deaths. I would confront Mario and Marion Kennedy. I walked into a religious supply store the next morning and bought the most formidable-looking crosses I could find. I bought 3 rosaries to wear around my neck. I bought a Bible. I even went to see a priest to have him bless some holy water. To be honest, I had no idea what I was doing. Perhaps my plan was to burst into room 323, splash holy water on 2 psychotic child-killing demons who wanted my blood to awaken a sleeping superdemon, then try to subdue them by hitting them with the Bible and poking them with the crosses. Believe me, at the time, this sounded as stupid as it does now when I'm telling it. Thursday night, I arrived at work and relieved the day staff. I sat for a while with all my religious items on me, trying to muster the courage to go to room 323. As soon as the bartender left, the lights in the hotel began to dim. All sounds vanished. It was time. I knew it, and they knew it. Whatever was about to happen was going to happen now. I walked up the stairs to the third floor and proceeded down the infamous hallway. The two lights at either end of the hallway glowed brightly, as if reminding me where I needed to go. I walked until I stopped in front of room 325. The door opened on its own, allowing red light to spill into the hallway. In the center of the room was a metal table with decorative fabric trim, situated over a small pit with a container on a track beneath the tabletop, exactly the kind of platform I had seen in the Polaroid photos that came with the notebooks. That was where they hoped to place me in the near future. I continued to room 323. The door was shut tight. I used my master key to unlock it electronically and pushed down on the handle. I hesitated before pushing the door open. Everything in me was screaming that I should turn around and run far away and never stop, but I knew if I did, this would never end. I would be hunted until I was caught. I was just delaying the inevitable. I gently pushed the door ajar. I hadn't realized I was looking down at the floor until I lifted my head and saw Mario standing right in the doorway, with an expression of insane rage on his face. The door swung open, but Mario remained motionless, as if the door had just passed through him. With all that had happened, this wasn't too far-fetched. Mario breathed deeply and heavily, his chest heaving with each intake of breath. The anger in his eyes was mesmerizing. I tried to break his gaze and looked past him to see Marion standing at the back of the room, striking a pose as if bowing, with a terrifying smile on her face. At that moment, I didn't know which frightened me more. I didn't realize it, but I had raised the 3 rosaries I was wearing around my neck up in front of me, and surprisingly, that seemed to deter Mario from coming any closer. Suddenly, he spoke. "Do you not understand your destiny?" "I do," I replied, with more confidence than I thought I possessed. "I just don't feel comfortable being stabbed to death, burned, and then having my own blood poured over me." "Whatever you do, you can't stop this." "Then do it," I blurted out without thinking. Immediately I thought, why am I provoking a demon? Fortunately, Mario didn't move. He just stared at me. I started to say, "You," but I was cut off, not interrupted, but my voice was completely slapped into silence. Everything around me distorted, the walls collapsing and then swelling, sounds erupting from indeterminate sources, only to be punctuated by sudden silences that, strangely, hurt my ears no less. Lights flashed and dimmed simultaneously, blinding me but also offering a strange sense of comfort. Then I passed out. When I woke up, I was lying in the middle of the floor of room 325. I don't know why, but something was dripping onto my face. Before I was fully awake, I used my finger to check what it was. It was blood. I looked up. Hanging above me was a crude wooden frame, erected like a canopy, something that certainly wasn't in the room when I looked earlier. Hanging from that wooden frame was a body. The victim's arms and legs were tied with bed sheets to the 4 corners of the frame. The torso sagged lower, with intestines and other internal organs dangling from a long cut across the back. When my mind fully cleared, I realized the clothes the body was wearing belonged to the bartender. Damn it, I had indirectly caused his death. Maybe not directly, but I hadn't acted fast enough. Damn it. Shame and regret washed over me like a shot of heroin to the bloodstream, momentarily paralyzing me with guilt. But I couldn't stop to feel sorry for myself. I sat up and saw the Kennedys standing in the corner of the room. I reached for my neck, searching for the rosaries, but only found empty space. They were gone. Marion held up the rosaries and burst into her characteristic screeching laugh. The cross I bought was now on top of the Bible, which lay on a small table next to the 2 of them. My plan was ruined. Blood was pooled all around me on the floor. I stood by the metal table and used it to help myself up, almost slipping on the thick, blood-soaked red carpet beneath. In a flash, Marion was standing directly in front of me. It seems we've been waiting for this moment for a very long time. I didn't know how to respond. I felt helpless. I sensed that these were my final moments. Unconsciously, I resolved all the internal conflicts weighing heavily on my heart. I silently atoned to those I had wronged in my life and regretted the wrong decisions I had made in the past. I raised my hand to wipe away a tear. As my hand lowered to my hip, it brushed against my pants pocket. I just barely felt the small vial of holy water I had tucked inside before heading down the hallway. While Marion continued to speak, staring intently into my eyes, I tried my best to get the vial out of my pocket and twist off the cap. At the top of the vial was a filter, allowing me to flick my wrist to sprinkle holy water, like during Catholic church services. We truly hope you understand what a great purpose you are serving. Ruel will be very grateful for your sacrifice. The blood of countless others will be proudly shed in the future because of your blood today. Shall we begin? At this exact moment, a Bruce Campbell or CSI Miami-style one-liner would have been perfect. A few phrases crossed my mind like, sacrifice this, or I'd rather spill holy water, or you look like you need a shower and a baptism. But this wasn't a movie, and I wasn't a B-grade actor, so instead, I said nothing. I raised my hand and flicked the vial of holy water, sprinkling it on Marion. Instead of burning her skin, as years of watching exorcism movies had led me to believe, Marion was thrown backward, slamming against the wall as if hit by a steel ball. I quickly regained my composure and splashed holy water on Mario, who was lunging forward, sending him recoiling with similar force as his distorted lover. I looked at them. Both were motionless. The only thing I could think at this moment was, wow, that was actually too easy. What was I so afraid of? I felt like I was on top of the world. Now I had to sacrifice them. I needed to show this disgusting demon that I wasn't someone to be trifled with, at least not easily. I gripped the vial of holy water between my thumb and forefinger as I pulled Marion's body onto the sacrificial table. This required no small amount of effort. The weight of an inert demon ghost was no different from a living human. I grabbed a bedsheet from the wardrobe while keeping an eye on Mario, who lay unconscious in the corner. I covered Marion's body with the sheet. The room door creaked open. I was ready with the holy water in my hand and immediately fell into a state of panic. Fortunately, Arthur Whitmore walked into the room. You'll need someone to conduct the ritual interview and the necessary chants. That will be my task. Then he held out his hand. In it was a long knife with a thick handle. I took it from his hand and stood at the head of the sacrificial table, my eyes never leaving Mario, who still lay motionless. Nicholas Jacob Beddick, do you offer this soul in the name of Ruel of Hell? I do. Do you intend to enter into a sacred agreement with Ruel? I do. Do you agree to obey his commands, fearing eternal damnation? I do, I stammered, not really understanding what I was agreeing to. Everything happened too fast. I didn't even have time to hear everything that was being said. Only in retrospect can I recount these words to you. Then, without further delay, let the sacrifice begin. I picked up the knife and, without hesitation, repeatedly plunged it into Marion Kennedy's body, which was covered by the sheet. Blood soaked through the white fabric covering her body. The knife passed through Marion's body and into the perforated metal tabletop below. I heard the sound of blood dripping into the bowl beneath. I stabbed until my arm felt like it would fall off, while Marion remained completely silent. She didn't move an inch. I don't know if she was unconscious the whole time or just tougher than any female ghost could possibly endure. To be honest, I didn't care. Arthur Whitmore stood there, watching with an admiring look. He gestured for me to continue, and I pulled Mario's body, half lying on his butchered lover, onto the table. I repeated the process, plunging the long knife fiercely into him, twisting and turning the blade as I pulled it from Mario's body. When I finished, my breath was ragged, my energy depleted. Now it's time to burn the bodies. The first thought that came to my mind was, how can I start a fire in a hotel room without turning the whole place into a giant inferno? Arthur spoke as if he read my mind. Don't worry, the fire will contain itself. These souls will burn hotter than any earthly flame. This will be a controlled fire, not a raging inferno. Who could argue with that logic? Nothing here was logical, so why should this be an exception? Arthur handed me a box of matches after I placed both bodies into the small pit. Don't forget to collect the blood, Arthur reminded me. I pulled the bowl of demon blood from its sliding track and placed it on the table behind me. A stench I hadn't noticed before filled the room, stinging my nostrils. I guessed it was the smell of decomposing corpses. I looked at the Kennedy bodies and realized they were decaying at an alarming rate. I took that as a sign that I needed to hurry. I struck a match and dropped it into the pit. Flames erupted, reaching high to the ceiling, then subsided, and exactly as Whitmore had said, the fire burned only an inch above the bodies, consuming them and the table but keeping the rest of the room safe. The smell of burning flesh permeated the air, almost making me vomit. Arthur and I stood there in silence, just staring as the fire began to die down. Arthur nodded towards the bowl of blood. I picked up the bowl and brought it to the sacrificial table. I poured a little onto the partially burned bodies, now mostly bone, and even those bones were turning to ash. Then I slid the table aside and poured the rest of the bowl into the fire pit, extinguishing the flames. I did it. I had sacrificed 2 demons to an even more dangerous demon. I looked at Arthur, but he looked different. A smile now appeared on Arthur's face, a terrifying, wide grin revealing hideous teeth, exactly like Marion's and Mario's smiles. "Thank you," Arthur mumbled through clenched teeth. "For what?" I asked, an immediate sense of unease filling the air. Arthur burst into laughter, an echoing, haunting sound. "Because you have completed your mission. They could only grant me 1 day on Earth, but you will grant me countless days." I struggled to understand what the hell was going on. "It was a pleasure to meet you," he said. He bowed. "I am Ruel." Fear pierced through my body, making me sicker than the putrid smell of the corpses. I watched as Arthur's facial skin began to peel off. The demon tore his clothes from his body, revealing his true form. It was a disgusting monster with 3 horns. Its legs were hooves, its hands like bird talons, and its skin as black as pitch. Its eyes were like 2 pure white, yet empty marbles. Its sharp teeth, jagged and numerous, lined its mouth in rows. It scraped its hooves on the floor twice, then opened its distorted mouth wide and let out a booming roar. That was the last thing I remember from that night. When I woke up, I was lying at the front desk. I don't know why, but something had compelled me to leave immediately before, and now I understood why. I think I owe you all an explanation. When I left the hotel, I went straight home. I showered, then I visited my sister's house to see my newborn nephew. I quietly took notes and found the right time to kidnap my nephew for the sacrifice ritual. You see, Mario and Marion were trapped in the hotel. They were ghosts or demon ghosts, whatever. But me, I have access to other males in the Whitmore bloodline. I can create more males from the Whitmore bloodline. Ruel, disguised as Arthur Whitmore, could appear as a ghost when needed, but he couldn't directly harm humans unless he was allowed to walk the earth in human form. As Arthur, he had me learn the summoning rituals and asked me to summon him directly. This connected him to me. Then he made me perform a sacrificial ritual. He knew I wouldn't kill a human, so he let Mario and Marion be my victims under the guise that it would end his hunt for me. In reality, sacrificing a demon to Ruel only made him stronger. He explained to me that I was truly the chosen one. Arthur Whitmore's mistake of summoning and betraying Ruel without performing a sacrificial ritual opened a door. That door was Ruel's opportunity to walk the earth by sacrificing male Whitmore descendants. I was simply unlucky enough to be the first boy born in several generations, and when I set foot in the Whitmore Hotel, where he prophesied I would become the easiest target. Now I live a life on the run. I stalk and hunt victims. I make many women pregnant, sometimes by consent, but often not. Then I wait until the sperm fertilizes the egg, and I sacrifice the woman in a ritual. Sometimes the child is a boy, sometimes not, but either way, Ruel is pleased. He particularly enjoys his days on Earth. Those days are often marked by an unusual number of deaths somewhere in the world, not all, of course, but certainly the most brutal massacres. I do all of this because I have seen hell, and I don't want to go back there. I have to keep doing this until it's my turn. If I do, Ruel promised I wouldn't have to go back there. He said there was another place I could go. I don't know if I believe him, but it's the only thing that keeps me going, that maybe after all this, things will be better. I'm sorry if this isn't the ending you expected, but this is my life now. I just wanted to tell my story fully and accurately, and this is it. It's time for me to go now. I've been watching a woman who lives on Fuller Street for a few days now. She's an easy target, so I think I'll do it. Goodbye, I'm Nick.